Yeah, when I tell people my username, sometimes I'll joke around and say, "Hey, I created that username, by the way. My wife did not." That'd be a little.
Yeah. I get that. She's asked you to continue to remind people of that.
Right,
Yeah.
I bet.
Sure,
That's right.
So are you fine with Kenneth? Is that what you go by?
Ken is fine.
Okay.
Ken is fine.
All right, cool,
Yeah.
cool. Well, basically, Ken, we are. I'm personally super excited. My wife and I, we made a little deal that we were both going to read a parent book, and she recently finished. Do you remember the name of that book that you?
Untangled, and I actually haven't finished it yet.
Yeah, so she's finishing up a book called Untangled that focuses on teen female adolescent season and all of that sort of thing. And then I just finished up your book, and then we are going to switch. So I've just been giving her an earful about the book that you wrote. And why don't you tell our audience a little bit, what was the point? What made you write that book?
Okay, well, that's a good question. Feeding the Mouth That Bites You is been a parenting workshop and essentially parent training that I have done for at least 25 years. Long time ago, we were all at the place in Dallas called the Minnerthmeyer Clinic, which was a Christian psychology or psychiatric facility. And back in the day, there was lots of parent seminars. People would give up a Friday night and all day Saturday and all this stuff. Anyway, so I would do this training and it would develop over time. And people would occasionally say, well, why don't you write a book? And my answer usually was, there's a lot of good books on parenting teenagers. But after a few years, I started recognizing there's a lot of books on parenting teenagers. And I got concerned that there wasn't a kind of a clear guide as to what are the main things as opposed to good ideas but not the main thing. Right. And so Feeding the Mouth That Bites You is and we'll talk about, I'm sure that it gets into what's called planned emancipation, and that's such a critical thing. So basically I wrote it because I feel like there's some really good ideas out there, but I worry that this primary thing that you must be doing with teenagers is just sort of stuck on the shelf with a lot of other good ideas.
Totally. Yeah. And I agree with what you're saying. So many parenting books out there. Reading yours, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You, it is, when I'm reading it, I'm thinking if I had to read one book on this subject, I'm glad I'm reading this one. In fact, we have a close friend of ours who she's kind of wrapping up her parenting of 3 children. 2 of them are in college now, and one of them is a few months from it. And she deeply wishes that she would have read this book a long time ago. She read it, probably a year ago. So the beauty of that for us is that our oldest child is 12, and so she recommended this book to us, and I just feel like, my gosh, I'm so happy about this. And here's one premise that you set forward in the book, and I want to hear a little, I guess, more history about it. But basically, you talked about how adolescence or teenage years is relatively a new thing. That's right. In other words, if back in the 1930s, and tell me if I'm saying the wrong decades here, but if you would have asked a family, hey, how are those teenage boys doing? They'd be like, well, I don't know what teenage boys means, but we got 2 15-year-olds that are manning a farm and they've got a family. So if that's who you're talking about. And so basically, now here in 2019 and the 50s, 60s, 70s and to present day, it almost, and these are my words, not yours, but it almost feels like everybody's now scrambling with, oh gosh, these kids are going to be home at least through 18. What do we do with these humans that are desperately wanting freedom and a clear distinction of what's adulthood and what's childhood? And it's like everybody's trying to figure it out. Well, my question to you, well, first of all, let me know if that's an accurate depiction. But
yeah, that's right.
What happened in history that these daggum adolescents are now staying around? Like what was the tipping point that changed culture?
Well, it's really, adolescence, a lot of people don't know this, but adolescence is a post-industrial revolution invention. And a lot of the parents that I work with are seeking to be what they would consider traditional, sort of old-fashioned. And they're often surprised to find out that, no, what you're doing is actually pretty newfangled, about 100 years old. So, right. Basically, adolescence, as we understand them, was first talked about in about 1904, and the word teenager wasn't really adopted till about 1941. So,
41.
If you go and read the Romeo and Juliet play, for example, there's this argument that Juliet's father is having with this suitor, not Romeo, that wants to marry Juliet, and he's arguing that she's old enough, and he says, well, she's so young, and he says, well, she's 13. A lot of women are already married and had their first child by now. So that's his argument. My great-great-grandfather ran off to Alaska at 15, and nobody called Child Protective Services. It was just, that's what they do. What are you going to do with kids? And so our understanding has changed a great deal, because the Industrial Revolution meant that our teenagers by 13, which is the end of childhood, that 13-year-olds are not really ready to occupy a hut at the end of the village and start their life. There's an increasingly complex culture that requires more training. But the biggest question is, during that training period, how do you think of these 13 to 18-year-olds? And we have the bad habit of thinking about them as essentially old children. And that's a core of a great deal of problems that people have.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I hadn't read that part yet, but Joey read that section to me and told me that, and it was pretty profound to me as well. And I think with us entering in, so our oldest, who just got home from school, is turning 13 this summer.
Is that a he or a she?
She.
Oh,
so our two oldest are girls. Yeah, and
Knock
our two
that
youngest
off,
are
Mr.
boys.
Ken.
Just saying.
But I am so thankful for books like yours and the one I'm reading too. I feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I really would have messed up pretty badly had I not heard some of this, because it just shows how much more independence I need to be giving and entrusting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, she feels like my baby still. She's still just so adorable to me. So it's just, I needed to hear that.
Yeah.
It's a whole different perspective.
So if you, I'll make up a little fictional scenario. If you could have every parent of teenagers captive attention for literally 30 seconds, what is the one thing or the one concept that they're just missing, that if you could just say 30 seconds worth of information, what would it be?
It'd probably be childhood comes to its natural end by around the age of 13.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah.
So hard to hear that.
And then but parenting is not finished. The job of parenting from 13 to 18 is training, not so much teaching, but training, and particularly for the goal of these young adults being ready to handle their own lives on their own.
Yeah.
Gracious goodness. Well, okay, so we have 3 children now in the house, pretty much, Priscilla.
You just broke my heart, Ken.
And that's
a heartbreaker.
I got to say, that's one of the reasons, Priscilla, I was really glad you were going to be on this, because I happen to know that, I spend a lot of time talking with moms. And, the general practice of releasing teenagers, you're not going to hear some friend of a dad saying, well, dude, I think that's a little bit rough. You should back up. Or, they're not going to do that. But many moms, even well-meaning family members, will take you aside. And if you say, we're leaving her schoolwork to her, this would be maybe in mid-adolescence, and as long as she keeps her grades up, we don't bother her. There'll be people that will, in all good conscience, think they're giving you some support by taking you aside and saying, we're just not sure about this. In other words, good mothering often instinctively is kind of a nurturing, like I can tell that's what my baby needs, and so let's put her down for a nap or whatever. And nurturance makes essentially letting go of teenagers feels a lot to mothers. Often it feels like unloving. It feels like I'm not really doing what I should do to take care of my child.
So let's, there's so many directions that I want to go. And I think the best thing to do is maybe to give you some scenarios and some questions, and then obviously using the book as your basis for answering it. And me just reading the book, coming fresh off of that, I do have some questions. But I will say this, Ken, you're really good at this. And I'm not joking. If I were you, I would do a Feeding the Mouth That Bites You podcast series, even if it had like a beginning to end to it, like just taking a chapter at a time. I mean, I just think it's such good information. I really, and the woman that let us borrow the book too has been recommending it to a lot of people as well. And everybody has the same reaction. It's like, thank you so much for giving us this. So let me throw this scenario at you. Let's say there's a 14-year-old boy who doesn't really care about school anymore. Just, it's not his interest. Maybe he's cheating a little bit here and there to get by on his test, so his parents stay off his back about grades. Seems to be a little self-centered brat. For parents, is this wartime because of the love you have for your kid? Like, not under my watch, not under my roof. I will not let you go this way because I love you. It is on.
Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. Number one, with school, you really have to always keep in mind that there absolutely is often a problem with school because of laziness. But you really need to know that that is often not the only thing, and certain learning problems look a lot like laziness. So it's always important with school to be cautious about, for example, most of the parents I work with are in the Dallas area, and they're involved parents, and so having.
And I'm sorry,
kid,
Ken, and I'm
sure.
sorry, when you say involved with, you are a therapist, especially for families with teens, right?
That's right. I'm a psychologist in Dallas. I work with families and teenagers and their families, and in marriage.
Yep.
So these parents, for example, when I have a parent who's got a 14-year-old that Dr. Wilkins, every year we just, he's grounded almost all year, and we're always telling him to do your homework. Essentially, if parents have done a relatively adequate job of motivating this teenager, and he just still, quote, doesn't get it, you have to at certain point back up and go, is this just a motivation issue? So number one, with school, you always have to keep that in mind, that it's not as simple as we would hope, that if we just give them enough hammer blows to the head, they'll suddenly become a great student. But secondly, the other thing with school is that it's common, and this is more important to the book, is that it is quite common that starting by adolescence particularly, the kind of micromanaging that parents do. Do you have any homework? Did you get your stuff done? Or all that stuff. While even if the kid isn't doing that great in school, it's kind of humiliating. Teenagers do not like to be micromanaged. And oh my goodness, they will even lie. There's actually what I consider normal lying among teenagers.
I have that down. I was going to ask you about that. So why don't you slow down real quick and say something about what normal lying would be? Because I know you're flipping out a lot of Christians right now. Are just like, I'm teaching my kids not to lie.
That's right.
Hell no to that Ken guy.
That's right. Because we did teach them not to lie, and lying is bad. However, there's such a lying that's so common that it really is nothing to get all worried about. Essentially, it's the kind of lying that is a passive resistance. It is a sort of teenager that is not willing to say the true answer to, do you have any homework? If their true answer is, I would like to refuse to answer that because I don't think it should be your business. Rarely teenagers have the confidence to do that, so they'll just say no when they in fact do have homework. And the important thing is they don't even feel guilty about it, because underneath that is this kind of passive resistance to this felt sense of occupying army. You shouldn't be into my school business anyway. And so I have no problem passively resisting. The bottom line is that when parents start to they reach a point where all of their micromanaging of this teenager still isn't getting his grades up, and he just hates our guts, you really have to rethink, okay, what's the most effective way to intervene? And that's really what the whole book is about, is being effective, not just doing what you're supposed to do, even if my kid doesn't like it, is what really works. Yeah. So in that example, it's common to back up and say, listen, we will stop micromanaging. You can handle it any way you want, but we're going to check your grade averages every 3 weeks, every 5 weeks, whatever. And if you don't have these minimum grades, then you'll have these restrictions. But again, in return, no micromanaging, but accountability goes along with it. Now, so that's the kind of thing that offers a certain amount of respect for their adolescence, young adulthood, if you will, but also holds them accountable for their behavior.
And Ken, your opinion would be with the school part. So for our listeners' sake, this book, how I received it is, hey, once they're 13, you need to aggressively start going after giving them more and more freedom with,
that's right.
You've got a plan in place to where it's not a reckless deal. It's very thoughtful and strategic. And the last thing that you give over to a kid is roughly the last 3 to 6 months that they're at home for their senior year. It's curfew. Hey, you
That's
stay
right.
out as So at what juncture would you say on average is good to go for parents to go ahead and, hey, we are doing away with this micromanaging school stuff. You're old enough to take care of this on your own. Like, what would you say is typically a good range to be thinking about giving that over?
It varies based on the teenager. So with a really, oppositional teenager, it can be done early, certainly 13 or 14 if you have to. But the important thing is when you have a real cooperative, like our middle daughter, who was this moderately anxious, excellent student that we take full credit for, you really still need to give her freedom at some point as well. So probably anywhere from 14 and 15 in that mid-range, you want to back off, because this will shock everybody. By senior year, I really think you shouldn't be involved at all. Senior year is, we'd like to see your grades to see if you're passing or failing. It'll sure help us to know if we're going to spend a nickel on college, but that's up to you. By senior year, a teenager has got to be managing their own stuff, pass or fail, because you've only got a few months to kind of get this together, or to let them handle it themselves.
So do you still, senior year, they're just managing everything on their own, probably have a job, making their own extra money, gas money, that sort of thing? What about curfew and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I don't really recommend that you let go of curfew until pretty much the day after they graduate high school. You're still required, while they're in your house, for them to be in school, all that kind of stuff. The main reason that I really want to emphasize or drill down on curfew is you'd be stunned how many last minute patients come to me at Thanksgiving because they're freshmen in college, came home, and Dr. Wilkes, he said, well, I'm going out. And we said, where are you going? And he said, out. And when are you going to come back? Later. And we had this huge fight because he had this weird idea that just because he was gone for 3.5 months making his own decisions about when to come in, he thought when he came to our house that he would have no curfew. I'm like, yeah, what's wrong with that? And then, so you get these kind of consistent arguments. Then you try to tell your young adult in college, well, we can't sleep until you're in our house safe. And the teen, this young adult says, well, you slept,
from my mom.
You slept fine for months while I was off in college, and now you suddenly have a sleep disorder. It just goes round and round. So you have to just clean your work up and have all this stuff done by the end of high school.
Yeah. Reading your book, it's almost like you're trying to shake the philosophy of parenting, and it's shaken, or is that the right word? Shaken or shook, Priscilla? I don't know. It's shook in a way that it gives a parent almost more sanity. And so how I've been describing people this book, for example, it's like, hey, give one of the first things that I want to give over to Rosa would be responsibility for her own room and how clean it is and everything. And kind of how you talk about these things is like, hey, you know what? You can fight with your adolescents for the next 6 years before they graduate about their room and never make some huge progress, but have a lot of arguing, have a lot of tension, and
right.
Or you can choose, give that over to them and have consequences for them mishandling it. So the dumb example that I use is, hey, if we give over to Rosa her room, and we give some guidelines such as things that can't be left out, things, keep the door shut, but if one of them is don't keep food in there that could spoil or attract ants, and let's say they attract ants and we actually have to call someone to come spray, well, that we're not paying for that. That's her room. Her room is the one that she's responsible for. So if she had that mishap, that's not something we're going to jump in and bail her out for. Is that
that's close
along the same lines?
You can do them. That's the basic philosophy. But keep in mind that Rosa, which by the way, it's a great name, Rosa, is going to be 13. So all my kids at 13th birthday, happy birthday. You don't have to clean your room anymore. Obviously, here's the washer, here's the dryer. The only thing I would say different is that the limits that are left about room are specifically because we don't want your freedom to infringe on our family life. So the difference that I would add is that since bringing food in your room will bring ants, then we're going to charge you 50 cents or $1 every time we find a cup or plate, because it's a little tough for Rosa to have the money for the exterminator when that comes. So we're just going to fine for that. But again, the key being that is kind of a punishment, so to speak, but it's not because we're trying to argue that cleanliness is next to godliness. Teenagers do not like you trying to get in their head. We're only arguing that, well, your room is attached to my house, so you're going to mess with us if you don't handle your. And few teenagers object to that. They understand the difference. And so I would just change a little bit that you don't have to wait till Rosa's got your house infested with ants. You can just fine her every time you find food in her room.
That's such a great idea. I mean, when he was saying that, I'm like, I was almost shaking my head. No, I'm like, well, no. No food is going in any bedrooms. Like, that's not happening. I have food phobia anyway.
Yeah.
No. I'm kind of strict about food staying at tables in this house. I don't like.
Well, and it's a good idea, but it's also partly how did you learn that? And you may not have gone through what Joey and I did, but I'm guaranteeing you that any of us that left home as boys, we've all lifted up that pile of clothes that we could swear was sitting on our floor for just a little while, and there's ants everywhere. So you learn that by seeing it happen.
Don't wrap me up into all those
just
messy
saying,
boys. I was a very clean boy.
Joey was actually a little OCD. He was actually very tidy. I was probably the gross one as a teenager.
We have medication for that. So.
Well, one of the things it's not even necessarily a question, but maybe you can speak to it. I feel like, as kind of a new parent of a tween moving into teen, I think I kind of, when I just chill out and take a step back, I think we have a really fantastic tween teenager. She's a really good kiddo.
Yes.
And so when I see that, I'm like, Priscilla, chill out, because everything she does is super appropriate for age and stage. She's super sweet still. But I find myself trying to figure out, what do I hang on to and what don't I? When you move into teenage years, it's sort of like talking about self-care and cleanliness and that sort of thing. But then at the same time, letting her be in charge of herself. Or
that's right.
I find myself sometimes being too intense about, hey, you wore that yesterday, you need to change your outfit. And I'm like, I can't help it. I keep doing it, but I feel like I probably need to let that go. My mom was pretty good at just letting me wear whatever I wanted. And I kind of grew into being a normal adult that didn't look so horrendous in public. I don't know.
You're trying to protect her from.
Just from any kind of teasing or whatever, if that could happen. But I think I over worry a little. I find, if I'm honest with myself, I think I parent out of fear sometimes.
Which
I wish
kill you.
It is. That's why I'm so thankful for you and this other book I'd read, because it is helping me exercise my new parenting muscles that I'm trying to grow, and letting go of some of that control. I just
see that's such a good point, because when you have a good relationship with your teenager, it's tempting to just kind of carry on, because that surely that will keep things the same way that they are. The truth is to keep your influence, for example, in her life. Then think of it this way. You want to be giving over as much freedom as you can. You really want to be kind of philosophically, your kids believe you that, we're trying to leave more and more to you. Yeah. But here's the big part, is that when you think of all that stuff I want to still talk to her about and whatever, that actually is much more effective if you have virtually everything that comes out of your mouth divided into two piles rather than this mix in the middle. Is my mother telling me, hey, you shouldn't wear that same thing today? Is that advice, or is that a have to? And teenagers can smell that from a mile away. And most of the time we talk in what I consider sort of mixed, strong advice. That I don't want to say you're going to be grounded if you wear it again, but seriously, you should. And that ends up kind of creating this tension of, you're talking to me like you think I don't know what I'm doing. So there's a really strong I guess, a really good tactic. That's learning how to give advice. And giving advice is basically like getting your teenagers to swallow a big pill, but you chop off the front and back of that pill. So you, instead of saying, I've lived here a few years and I know a few things about how you should dress, which makes it harder to swallow. Mm-hmm. You cut off the front end by saying, honey, we've already talked about this, and what you choose to wear is up to you. That's your call. Now with girls, by the way, you can actually say, you can pick a point where you can dress how you want as long as it's not too low, too tight, or too short. So you can still hold on to part of that. But again, the key being is that you clearly label as advice. So, sweetie, that's up to you. But can I just tell you, and this is probably just me as your mom, and then you lay in that thing you want to tell her. But then you finish by cutting the end off of it, but at the other end by saying, but listen, I know probably that was dumb for me to tell you. I used to do that with my kids all the time. I'd always go, I'm a shrink, so I worry, probably just being a dad. And then I would lay in what I wanted to tell them. But believe it or not, that kind of communication, and this is what's so important about giving freedom, is that when you give over freedom, it should, and very often does, give you a great deal more ability to communicate with your teenager. For example, when you say you can now listen to whatever music you feel is right between you and God, as long as it's on your AirPods and your sister can't hear it or whatever, and I'm certainly not going to listen to it. That, number one, is a good freedom to give early, because I think you know this, no parent is in fact controlling their teenagers' music. Right. Unless you're Amish, you just are not able to keep that. So you look silly when you still try to make these controlling statements. But, and this is the important part, once you've clearly given that over, that's up to you now because of your age. That should give you the freedom to say, hey, can I look at your playlist? Like, I'm just curious. I mean, we're on our way to church and you're listening to Kendrick Lamar. It just, how does that for you, as opposed, so that, and I guarantee you that kind of interaction is powerful. It is not less powerful than, for example, speeches, which is what dads usually do. Those are things that you feel like it's good parenting, but it's not. So giving the freedom opens up communication, which is very much more impactful.
Yeah, and just so you know, a lot of Kendrick Lamar's content is storytelling. So
I know.
Joey loves Kendrick Lamar.
I have his essentials on my iPhone, and yet,
nice.
But I'm not. I'm over 13, so there you go.
I'm impressed. I'm very impressed that you use Kendrick Lamar as an example and not like LL Cool J. I mean, no offense, but
those are all. Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate that. That's all because of my children. Thank you, and other teenagers that keep my references relevant.
One thing you kept circling back to in the book that just keeps bringing the reader back into the point you're trying to make, and again, complete liberty to say that's not what I said, young man, but you keep saying that parents can't control these little humans anyway. Like, that's not something that we can do. But I mean, isn't that pretty much a concept that you keep going back to as far as these kids they can't be controlled? Or you can't make them do certain things, correct?
In a way, I would say yes and no. With teenagers, first of all, this all starts at around 13. So parents often are surprised. Like, I had a couple came to me years ago, and should we make our 11-year-old go to church? I'm like, are you going to make him take algebra when he gets, that's what you do. Yeah. You don't give. So go nuts with your younger ones. I'm fine with whatever you do to teach, discipline, all that you need to do. But by 13, yes, it's critical that you start recognizing in disciplining teenagers. One of the main sort of axioms is you cannot make a teenager do anything. And that's essentially about you'd be surprised, maybe you wouldn't be, how quickly a family can descend into some weird physical, almost fight, because I'm just trying to make my kid make my kid give me his phone, for example. That's always my favorite. You can't make them do stuff. If you do, you run the risk of a social worker on your front door the next day. And the most important thing is you don't need to make them do stuff. Your power with a teenager is not in your size or any kind of physical threat. You control them because everything your teenager has, you own. So, and so being clear, I talk a lot about, parents of teenagers must think of themselves as not a policeman. You're a judge. So a policeman has to say, give me that phone, give it to me now, and whatever. But a judge doesn't have to grab the phone. The teenager says, nope, you're not taking my phone. And if you want to be really impactful, your first move as a parent is to smile. Oh, okay. So you're not going to give me your phone. All right. That'll be great. And then start talking about what the consequence will be. So yeah, you impact them, but control specifically, like in kind of physical sense, no, you can't control them.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say, I think that's probably one of the hardest things for me. I mean, you're right physically, but I think that there's some regrets that I have. I've been talking this out with Joey. There's things that I maybe had wished I'd been held accountable more in school and that sort of thing. And so I sense myself going on the opposite side of the spectrum, and I'm being kind of intense with accountability with school, because I'm like, I don't want you to make the same mistakes that I did. And I don't want it to be hard for you. I want all your opportunities to be open for you. And I'm a talker and I communicate a lot. So I think she knows how I feel about it. I also apologized to her for being the first one because I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Right.
Because I'm a dummy. I even told her sometimes I'm afraid and sometimes I react out of fear, and I'm sorry for that. So I mean, at least I'm saying that, but it's hard. It's hard. I want the very best for her. And it's very hard if I feel like I see something that I know for sure is best. I just want to make it happen, and
you probably
can't.
Hear that all the time, right, Ken?
I do.
So give us some free therapy. Like, what would you say to a mom sitting in your office saying that exact same thing? I'm almost like, hey, we don't want to lose our baby here.
I like the way Priscilla says that, though, that I think that you should know there's a very big difference between a kind of commanding presence that's, 15, 14, 15, 16, no, you're not going to be, let's not snack. Let's get our homework out, and this kind of patronizing tone. Rather than, I think you sound a lot more approaching more and more adult to adult. So if your teenager is not pushing back or resisting, then I think it's great to be able to kind of go along side by side and influence all you want with their schooling. But particularly the key to keep that influence going is to make sure, and this is what I think you're saying when you apologize or when you put it in context of your own background, I think you're saying, you're recognizing or showing them, I recognize that this is, you're old enough to be making your own decisions about this stuff. I just really want to try to be helpful, and I hope I'm not, kind of being overly patronizing in my approach. I think you can, if you know your kids well, then I think you can trust the kind of how much to press and how much to own, but especially if you're owning it, that really helps her to hear that, okay, I think this is mostly advice that my mom's giving me. And advice, I can only tell you, while advice has to be given as optional, you can blow me off if you want, but here's what I would suggest. Teenagers do not usually completely ignore advice. They really don't. What they ignore is what sounds like a speech or a patronizing reminder or whatever. So it really, letting go of a freedom or giving freedom does not mean letting go of impact. And that's just really critical to keep reminding everybody.
Oh, that's so good. Giving freedom does not let go of impact. I like that a lot. What do you think about paying for grades or rewarding for grades or stuff like that?
Paying for grades is fairly effective with a lot of children, and it is increasingly ineffective with teenagers. Your older teenager will take the $100 or whatever, but especially by the time they're in high school, you really have to ask yourself if they still need a financial reward to want to do well in school and still haven't recognized that these are your grades, this is your future, then it actually can interfere with the need for them to really own this. This is their schooling. So it usually becomes less effective, and I really discourage it by later years because again, it's almost a way of making it seem like my teenagers' grades are all about us as parents, and that's the wrong message.
Gotcha. That sounds good. Because one of the things, in my opinion, this is where Joey and I are sometimes trying to still find the same page together, is I think we both tend to take away instead of reward.
Yes.
Like we start with something and we take away. And I think, at least for me personally, it's easier. It's easier for me to be like, oh, now I got to take this away. And I just do that. And it's harder for me to reward. And I've noticed that in myself. And I told Joey, and he's like, I don't want to pay our kids to do chores in the house. They should do that. And we're kind of at this sort of point of tension with that. I kind of want to reward them a little bit more, because I feel like that feels a little more positive. I mean,
I think my wife and I are we're very much the same. Like I always, and again, for children, for 12 and under, then, I always admired those parents that creatively rewarded stuff and made it fun. And
me too. Wife, that's so hard.
Yeah. And my wife and I would look at each other and go, yeah, we should probably do that. Yeah. But we kind of didn't. However, with teenagers, what parents often don't recognize is the implicit reward that most teenagers actually want is autonomy. Leave me alone. That's actually what they want. So trying to get a 15-year-old to get all A's so you can have a pizza party with your friends is actually as much kind of patronizing as it is rewarding. So again, it is a reward to give teenagers freedom. What if we bring like a cake? Or drive a Maserati up front. Absolutely. Whatever it takes. It just autonomy is the real reward that teenagers want.
Good point.
Is there one thing that I've been thinking about a lot, because with my we have our two oldest are girls, our two youngest are boys, and I noticed the other day, I feel like I have a great relationship with all of our kids. I think Priscilla and I have done a pretty decent job. My philosophy is no kid is ever going to leave their parents' household with absolutely nothing that they reflect on and say, yeah, mom and dad kind of screwed me here, with different habits, or, I truly believe that. But I noticed one time, so my sons, there's mutual respect there. I respect them. They respect me. But I feel like I lose my cool a lot, and I raise my voice and that sort of thing. But I'd say for the most part, I'm able to keep it kind of chill. And so what that has allowed me to do is the times where I really do want their ears focused on me and their attention on me, I step up the volume, I get a little look on my face, and I can have complete control. And I'm not even that mad, it's effective. But I saw the other day fear in their eyes, and I immediately stopped and I said, sons, I don't think I called them sons, but sons.
Like Abraham, yeah.
Exactly.
Come let me bless you first. But then, but basically I said, hey, I was like, I love the fact that y'all respect me. I love the fact that when I say something, it's something that y'all take in. Now y'all are hard-headed as all get out, and sometimes it takes a while, but I don't want y'all to ever be afraid of me. And I said, are y'all afraid of your dad? And they both said no, but obviously that's the best they could answer. I saw fear on their face. Is there a healthy, because my, unresearched answer to this would be no, there's not. But is there a healthy sense of fear that kids can have for their parents?
That's a really great way to put it, because I can tell you that among very few other things separates your generation from mine, and certainly my parents. Most of the parents I work with, that's been a huge goal. I don't want my kids to fear me like I feared my parents.
Yeah.
And yet respect is very close to fear. And so parents are often kind of a little stymied by, I don't know what to do with this uncooperative teenager, and I certainly don't want her or him to fear me. And I'll be honest, I don't have as much problem with a moderate amount of fear, or using that word, because respect is very much like fear. So I think it's the biggest thing when you use the dad voice is that it's critically important that is kind of a physically related thing. It's tempting to use because it works with our children. But by teenage years, and one of your boys will probably be the first one of them is going to, if that's what you rely on, then they're going to put their foot over the line and decide what's he going to do if I don't do this thing he yells at me about? So that's, it becomes less effective. But to be honest, I have less problem with the idea of children having a moderate or healthy fear of their parents than I think most people your age. Most of the parents I work with now, they're just like you. They really don't want that. because we want our kids to be closer to us than we were to our parents. That's our goal anyway.
It's interesting because when you say that, I think about the type of fear I had for my dad. Now, the type of fear that he had for his dad, totally unhealthy.
Yeah,
my grandpa, I love
yeah.
him, God rest his soul, but was a very fearful parent, verbally
Right.
abusive, physically abusive. Now, my dad, my brother and I, we joke around about this. My dad had the longest fuse in the world. We rarely saw him mad, but once he got there,
Right.
don't you dare speak back to him. And we'll say this in front of my dad, and he is the sweetest, most loving. And so he just gets this big grin on his face because he knows we're right, but that's not his natural place. But once he got there,
yeah,
I mean, I'm serious. You just do not push back on anything. You might as well just stand there and take whatever he has to say and say, yes, sir. And then I'll do whatever you want me to do. And then I'll go to bed, sir, sort of thing. I don't have any resentment towards him for that. I don't feel like it messed me up at all because it actually did help kind of bring some control over the house when my brother and I were stepping out of line. And
right.
And so, yeah, that's interesting because where I'm at right now, I'm like, I don't want my boys to fear me, but that type of fear that I had for my dad, I don't think it was bad. I think it was just, I ain't talking back to him right now. I know better.
We're talking about a couple things at the same time. I think it's always funny when we talk about men with your father's temperament. We always call his patience a fuse. And, a fuse is attached to a bomb. And so, I know a lot of us take that kind of like pride in, hey, I do, but I've got a long fuse. Really, the goal is, not to, I'll tell you this with teenagers, they are not as afraid when you're angry as when you're taking appropriate action. I've known teenagers that if they can get their parents freaked out and cursing in ways they wouldn't want anyone to know and all that, they kind of, there's a comfort level they have because they know that this is going to lead to mom coming in and apologizing and dad saying, and I won't end up with any real consequence. So what's much more scary or, to be scary, I think is actually not as related to overt anger as we tend to think. I think it's real scary is real action that fits the consequence that the consequence fits the action and you're very firm with it.
And you gave an example. I wish I would have thought to look this up, but it was super comical. But you brought an example as far as a kid, completely ditching a parent's wishes, and you said something to the effect of, "There's nothing more intense with a blank stare on your face or half smile, drinking a cup of coffee, and then basically say, okay, we'll see how that pans out for you," or something like that. Just calm, collected, sip your coffee.
That's
give them
much
a little half smile.
That's exactly
okay, you want
right.
to try that? Go for it.
That's the kid that kept the room a mess just like you warned them not to, and she comes out and goes, "Quick, you've got to iron this. I'm supposed to wear this today," and you just stand there, sip your coffee, and go, "Oh, that's a bummer. I hate when that happens because that's not my problem. That's not my problem." So yeah, I'm cool with them being a little bit fearful, kind of, but I think I want to be clear. I don't think anger is actually the thing that makes children and teenagers the most appropriately fearful. I think it's action.
Yeah, that's good.
Does it drive you crazy these days for someone who's dedicated his whole life to helping families? Like I see this personally, and I know that a lot of this is coming from a judgmental heart, and I try to give the situation the benefit of the doubt. But we've all been there, at Target, and we've all had kids, stepping out of line. But I would say that not all of us do the whole "I'm going to let my kid basically be in charge." The whole exchange of a dad saying, "Hey, come here," and the kid shakes his head no, and he's like, "I mean it," and the kid says no, and then he just goes about his business and doesn't make the kid come. And I'm thinking to myself, what is your plan? Because that's not going to work out. That's not going to just fall together. Like, when you see stuff like that, what do you think?
That's what's funny about that. That's the exact example that I think of in kind of getting a sense of what is typical fatherly interaction. Because I'm like you. I hate that. I hate watching that. So if mothers have a classic kind of nurturance where I'm just going to take care of my child and give them what they need, I think dads have if there's a I'm generalizing here, but it's kind of a warrior training. And that's exactly the example where when you're watching that kid just blow his parent off and walking away, it kind of makes me mad. And it's not even my kid. It's actually me worried for that boy that, man, if he keeps doing that, it's going to be. So that's kind of the common sort of difference that moms and dads have, is moms feel like, listen, I think I know more of what's really going on inside our kid. And dads have that constant, yeah, but if we keep blank, then he's or she's not going to be prepared for. And yeah, that's what I hate about that Target kid that walks away. You just think, man, that kid's going to be out of control before you know it.
It only happens at Target. I don't see it at Walmart for some reason. I mean, it's Target.
Only Target.
We're big
All
Walmart
the spoiled
here.
kids are at Target.
We see
Well,
it
I had these two questions are not related, but these are two things I was thinking of. Is one,
and just so you know, for time, we are wrapping this up. We got a few more things to throw.
I don't want to, but I know.
I know. This is free for us, Priscilla. This is unreal.
You're so amazing.
Wait, are you going to invoice us? I bet you're going to invoice.
I do need a home address, so that's fine.
That's funny. Well, the two different things I'd love to hear you speak into is I try not to be afraid of social media, because so many people have different opinions. Like, a lot of parents just don't know what their kids are doing, and some have a really good handle and are constantly investigating. To me, I'm too overwhelmed to just try to learn all the things and know everything about it. I just don't know if I have the margin for all of that. So, like, what do you invest your time in and what do you trust? I hope that we've instilled enough values that they kind of know how to make good choices, but still help and monitor. And then my other question was going to be, you can answer whatever order, is like, have you had really, really heartbreaking, really hard? I mean, you do a really good job. I mean, all of us are like drinking water from a fire hose, it feels like, with the information you share. Like, did you learn some things the hard way? Like, how did you land on your wisdom? Did you have great parents? I want to know all your personal things.
Yeah, let me start with that one, because let me say, I lost my dad 3 years ago, and I lost my mom just about 2 months ago.
Oh
and yeah, that, I just have to be honest. They were great parents. At a funeral for someone, you're always sitting there, and I think, how many times you sit in here and there's this shadow side of this person that everyone knows, but we're just not going to bring it up. Yeah. And neither of my parents had that. And I guarantee you mine's going to have that. So I just had really good parents that, but I'll be honest, probably some of this was based a little bit on adjusting things they did. Like, my father's his family background was very rough, and he actually honored my mom a great deal by not involving himself too much in the discipline part. He was an involved dad, but he trusted my mom's instincts. And my mom probably leaned, especially school-wise, way into over control and so forth. So it wasn't all perfect, but and as far as making mistakes, you got to be kidding me. I mean, I'm here talking to you from my son's house, the oldest, who, just like your oldest, they had to endure the stuff that we did all this with our kids, but they certainly saw us go back on things we had said or make mistakes. It's the best part is it's not math. It doesn't have to be done exactly right. And so when you have that overall involvement and spirit of love and investment, then, that virtually always covers a multitude of sins. So
it's always so encouraging.
But with the social media, let me real quick tell you that I think you are right to be at least alert and a bit worried, because social media is new and the landscape is still being worked out. A lot of parents I have, for example, are having to back up on having allowed a lot more screens. And screen is really your first thing to think about, just a lot more freedom with screens than they intended. There's some really good books. I don't know what you're reading. There's Nancy Jo Sales wrote a book called American Girls, Social Media and the Secret Lives of Teenagers. One that I really liked was called Irresistible. But the point is that you get this, if you do enough research, you almost find out that there's I'm not going to overstate this, but almost a conspiracy that the California folks that make these devices are not allowing their kids to have these devices until much later. Like Bill Gates didn't let his kids have a phone until they were 14. Steve Jobs, who told us everyone should have an iPad, wouldn't have allowed his children to look at an iPad until they were at least 7. So we
Those
have to
jerks, they're using
I know,
our kids
I know.
as
It
guinea
really
pigs.
is. It's creepy. It's kind of creepy.
Yeah.
So a lot of the Facebook execs are now wealthy and retired and apologizing for a lot of the things they're doing. So again, it's not a purpose. It's not a reason to be afraid, but it's definitely a reason to be cautious. That's where you really need to have other areas of your life that you're giving freedom over, because social media freedom for a lot of, especially girls, is practically oxygen. And so, trying to restrict that can require a great deal of trust on their part that you're not just trying to control everything in my life. So you want to use your freedom, spend your capital on that. I've let go of a whole lot of these other things, but we are going to maintain some limits on some of these things. But you have to be realistic. Taking away a 14-year-old's Snapchat, for example, very likely means that she will pop up another Snapchat you didn't know she had.
Totally.
So you continue to have to regularly give over freedom with that kind of stuff in an orderly stage, going from you can't have this to you can have this, but I need your password, to finally you can have this, but change your password and don't tell me, it's up to you now. But those are things that it's perfectly reasonable to be cautious about. Not so much like they're going to be kidnapped. That's actually incredibly rare. But things like saying things on text that they really regret, stuff like that. That's where your communication is helpful. I don't recommend that you, in general, just check their texts all the time. You end up finding what I call white knuckle information, that she's using bad words I didn't know she was using, but I'm not going to do anything about it. So you just have to be very careful in balancing your freedom and limits on that. And I got to tell you, that's still a little bit uncharted territory is all. It's still being worked out.
Yeah, that's why I feel like that's just tough to know, because I think about all the things we could do when we're together with our friends that our parents don't know. Well, now
that's right.
We can it's sort of like, if they don't delete things off their phone, we can just look at everything. Well, my parents didn't get to look at all my conversations with my friends.
Exactly.
So it is hard to know what to just let go of and what to really pay attention to. And partly, I worry more about just mean girl stuff, like girls being mean, or boys being really inappropriate, or just the bullying stuff. Like I don't want people having access to her a bunch. Yeah.
Well, and I'll tell you that, the primary, we don't have time for that, but the primary thing to look at in mean girl stuff isn't devices. It is friendships. I cannot believe in the last 30 years I've actually had to begin to teach teenage girls the importance of friendships. I never had to teach a girl. That's what drama is all about, is, my friend, and she tried to be more, hone in on this friendship. Now we have more and more girls that are busy with their own things, which is good, sports and whatever. But the key to keeping your kid from being bullied is that they have one or two close friends. All it takes is one other person other than your kid to tell that mean kid, hey, why don't you shut up? That shuts down the fun very quickly. So relationship is critical in all of that. But the last thing I'll say is same thing with social media. When you buy the capital of giving freedom and being able to communicate with her, then you're much more effective than this increasingly limp and weak trying to control everything they're doing out there on social media. You're going to get weaker and weaker, and you really have to be able to communicate and be able to trust her judgment more and more. That's much more powerful.
Yeah, so true.
So I like black and white. I like concrete structure. I know I don't get this with parenting, but I do want to ask you this, and in this way, do you think is it good to say that all this boils down to, once your kids hit 13, you should be more focused on training, accountability, but then not freaking out about the consequences or the results, because the results are ultimately based on, first of all, whether or not they take in your recommendations and your training and all that kind of thing. But bottom line is, we don't get to decide what type of kids we have.
Yeah.
Like we may want our kids to flourish in school and kill it with scholarships and have good balanced friendships and make good decisions. And we may train very well to that degree or to that aim, but we don't get to choose how it works out.
Yeah, I always my favorite, one of my favorite quotes is the ancient rabbi that said, up until 13, I talked to my son about God. And after 13, I talked to God about my son. And so I think it's critical that kind of distinction is there, that after 13, yes, the teaching and discipline that you've been doing up until 13 really needs to change to more and more. Now you're playing the role of the society that they're going to be eventually released into. And so you give them more and more ability to make their own choices, hold them accountable for those choices, but not in the same way that you would with children, that you're controlling and directing and making and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How widespread has, obviously answer within reason at your comfort level, but how widespread has how exposed has your book been to audiences? Because I mean, we took it from one recommendation. I have no idea how well it's doing or how many people have read it. I hope that it's a lot.
But it's funny because when I first put the book out, which is about 3 years ago, I just I'm 60, and I'm not the big marketer dude, and so there was several things I probably didn't do, but it's done, frankly, surprisingly well. And I really appreciate your appreciation of it. It's a little bit like being able to contact parents that are, in my view, enlightened. Like, now you get it. You see
Right.
what I mean? And yeah, the enthusiasm has been just fantastic. And the book sales, I'm not going to kid you, it's gone much better than I thought.
That's awesome.
And I'm just, the main thing for me is just being able to hear from people exactly like you guys, that you didn't spend 3 hours in my office, for me to teach you all this kind of stuff. You can kind of look at a book and go, oh, all right, I get it now.
Yeah.
And I just am so enthused by that. It's fantastic. And I really, I've gotten quite a bit of that, to be honest. And it's just really exciting.
Yeah, that's gotta be give you a really cool sense to know that your work is legit changing families and changing how parents approach things. And you
That's
obviously
exactly
believe in your material. And
I
so
do.
that's gotta be,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's great. Well,
That's exactly right.
How do your kids feel about it? Are they so glad you wrote a book on parenting?
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah. I don't know if they're excited that I wrote a book on it, but they've always been very enthusiastic about this stuff. I mean, I think it's hard to be a shrink's kid, where you do stuff and then you talk about the philosophy behind why you're doing stuff and whatever. But they've been very supportive, and I think I'd be pretty dishonest if I were a guy who didn't do this, or even if I did it and my kids were off the rails. But I'm not going to kid you. My kids we have a great relationship with all three of our adult children. They're all married. I've got 5 grandchildren, and this stuff, I can tell you, in my own family and the different families I've worked with, it works. It makes it, you can keep a connection with teenagers and adult children that is without a whole lot of that tension that we've come to think of as normal. It's not normal at all. So yeah, they're pumped about it.
That's awesome. And you're not, I mean, I don't know if it'd be that hard to be a kid of a shrink. You're pretty laid back. You don't seem too uptight. You're pretty cool.
But I got to tell you, my kids, the hardest thing for me was after they were 13, they didn't think I was funny anymore. And that really, because by golly, I'm funny. And
you know what? I don't think, I've never thought I was that funny, but I have definitely experienced, I am currently this year experiencing the transition from my kids thought I had cool dance moves, cool whatever, and I am just not that cool anymore.
You're
and
out.
I am like, how did this happen so fast? I was awesome. I am like, I do the mom dancing now. Like, I'm not that cool.
That's always a winner. Always a winner, mom.
Yeah, the music I listen to is kind of keeping me some credits.
Yeah, I'll bet that's right.
Yeah.
Now, so. Well, Ken Wilgus, PhD, licensed psychologist, specializes in treatment of adolescents and their families. Maintains you still have your outpatient practice.
I do.
In Dallas, Texas, and PhD, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You. I really can't recommend this book more than what I mean. I'm begging people to read it, and I don't say that about too many books, but I am super thankful for it. We really do appreciate your time.
Yeah,
Joey,
it's such an honor.
Thank you, Joey, Priscilla, both of you. I really appreciate it, and especially your input, Mom. Mom's input is particularly important in this stuff. So I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Have a good weekend, and I'll let you know when this comes out.
Thanks, man.